Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. It's Monday morning, so this is Condo Solutions, 9 to 10 o'clock. Every Monday, we talk about things that affect you and your condominium or homeowners association, some of the issues that you may have to address or questions you may have, just general information that we're here to help you with. For those of you that are new to the condo world or the HOA world in Florida with the regulations that exist, maybe you've got questions now that you've moved into one and you didn't realize it maybe when you bought, or those of you that are on the boards of these associations and have questions about how to handle certain issues. We're here to provide that. My name is Mark Brackbill. I'm a CPA and also a community association manager. And with me on the show and co-host of the show is Peter Mullengarden. Peter's an attorney, and he's been doing this kind of work, primarily representing the associations for the last 35, 40 years or so. So we're here to kind of facilitate, help any way we can, try to provide you with information. So it's a resource for you to use to get some of those answers maybe when you're a little confused. A couple things that we'll tell you is one, I'll give you the phone number, 220-9788. Again, that phone number is area code 772-220-9788. That's also 220-WSTU. And if you write that number down and keep it for other shows on WSTU, that's the number in the studio. And there's other call-in shows you can call and maybe ask questions or get information, and Evan will help you out and get that taken care of. So that's the first thing. That's the phone number. Some ground rules on the calls, nothing big, but we do need a name to call you. We don't need to know your name, but we need a name to call you. And we also don't need the association, because that sometimes confuses people. They hear an association, they think, that's a different problem. I don't need to listen. And many of these problems are similar across associations, not exactly the same. So that's why sometimes when we answer your question, we may talk a little broader or say, well, if you've got this situation, it might be a little different, just so that we can hit some of those associations that maybe the person didn't call, or maybe they just weren't sure and they thought their situation was a little different, and we can kind of cover it that way. So bear with us, because we will, maybe talk around an issue or a little broader on an issue. And then the other thing that we always tell you is that we give you the best answer we can, but we call it a radio answer because we don't have your documents, and the documents do impact the answer many times. And sometimes they can impact it not just a little bit, but they can actually completely change the answer. So we don't have your documents. So that's why we always warn people, don't take, if you're going to go to court, make sure you hire somebody like Peter and let them look at your documents and go through and come up with an answer. Don't just use what you hear on the radio, because without your documents, and we can't give you 100% answer. We will give you the best answer we can based on your interpretation of your documents and common procedures, laws, court cases, things like that and years and years of experience. But we can't be 100%, because we don't have those actual documents to look at. So otherwise, that's the basic ground rules. Everything else is pretty much fair game. So feel free, give us a call, and we'll be happy to address it. The only thing we don't talk about directly is the value of your home or your condominium. We're not going to tell you how much it's worth, but we can tell you how to evaluate what some of the issues of one association versus another that will impact your value. For example, if you've got an association and you've got fully funded reserves and you've been doing your maintenance on a regular basis, then a unit in your association should be worth more than the unit in the neighboring association, and that maybe hasn't done that hasn't put those reserves, even if it's the exact same building, because it makes a difference. Because if your previous owners have put money aside, they've paid for their use towards the building. Whereas, if you buy a unit in a building that there are no reserves, or the reserves are way understated, what it really amounts to is the person that sold you their unit, they used up all of those resources and didn't have to reimburse for them, and instead you have to, which is kind of not fair. You should pay for your current use. You shouldn't have to pay for the previous use. But we'll talk about that a little bit as we're going on. Other than that, that's the basic things. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Morning, Mark. I'm well. I'm well. How are you?
Good.
Happy Monday.
Yeah, same to you. I know it's every day's an adventure. It gets to be with all the stuff going on. It's kind of interesting, but it's interesting, Peter. I have uh, now have I've kind of merged my audit practice in with another firm, and we haven't finalized everything yet, but we have, but all of the audit work that I do on all my condos and other corporate entities goes through and is with this other partner, and it's been really kind of a good situation because I get to see more things. I had a decent sized practice, Sierras and things like that on the audit side, but his was about his is about three times or four times, I think, three or four times what mine is. So it's nice because he brings me in for some of these issues that are going on, and so I get to hear about and address and deal with certain more issues that are going on. So it's been a real interesting process for me. So this last few months has been in many areas very educational. It's to let me get back and give you a good example. The other um, I hadn't in my firm, I hadn't done a turnover audit for a while. A lot of times those are done by the developers, CPA sometimes, or just there's you just don't do them sometimes. You're just not involved. We've always kind of represented the association side a lot of times, and so I had an opportunity to deal with reserves. I mean, with guarantee, the developer guarantee in the condo area, which was kind of interesting. I've looked at it and done a lot of that stuff with the HOA stuff lately, but not the condo. So um, that was kind of interesting. It's one of those things that after all of the times that I've looked at that, the good thing, as you know, the good thing about dealing with the condo side is you've got the administrative code, right? So even if the code says the exact same thing as the statute, the nice thing is that it provides the code provides a lot of times an example or something, and so it's kind of neat that at least you've got something to look at and say, this is kind of interesting. But after having done those for a long time and dealing with some relatively complicated issues on turnover audits. I did audits on two of probably three engagements that were being used by the state as to challenge cases and things. So it's kind of an interesting situation, and they were unusual in that it was a condo turnover, and the association was the association had been under developer or bank control or the government control for over 10 years. It was really to the point that you're not normally dealing with reserves or replacements of major things, because usually you've turned over long before those things go bad, and here you're getting into a situation where you're having to do all that. So it was kind of an interesting, but what I was looking at and is the funny thing is that the developer guarantee situation is really fairly clear, in the statute, that at the end of the guarantee period, the developer owes, you take the total common expenses, you basically subtract out the assessments that were paid by the members, and there's some restrictions on that, but they can't overcharge and all that kind of stuff. But whatever that number is, you subtract that out, and then the rest is what the developer pays. But the funny thing is, on an interim basis, because the association might not have the cash flow, the calculation for how much the developer has to pay in, not what they owe, but what they have to pay in, is actually different than the calculation for what they owe. So, so they kind of probably, the way it's designed is they would get that back at the end. Normally, it's not a big deal. The calculations are usually very similar, but what comes into play is if you've got an association, which I did here, that had ancillary services, significant ancillary services, including like valet and things like that. So, and those, some of those services, the valet, were operating at a significant loss. So, and the developer has to fund that loss. They don't have to pay for it. It's kind of a weird situation, but anyway, it was, it's kind of interesting to look at some of these problems again, after you've been away from them for a while, and realize what the state was trying to do, or what the legislature was trying to do, and what the state was trying to do in the administrative code. So it's kind of an interesting situation. And I know, and I bring all this up because with all the stuff that's going on, I'm certain that there's going to be a lot of legislative change coming up. And furthermore, to the extent that legislative change, a lot of it's going to be in the condo area, there's going to be an awful lot of the administrative code. The division is going to be asked to, define some of this stuff. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about that is that most of the people who are involved in examination and that are not actually CPAs anymore, or even accountants. Most of them are called financial analysts, and a lot of them don't have any accounting experience. They know the law, but they don't know what that means from an accounting standpoint. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of this stuff, especially as it relates to reserves, and the funding of reserves, and pooled reserves in particular. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Peter, but it's kind of interesting where we're at, I think.
I don't know. It's being studied by, a lot of different groups, people. Obviously a lot of this, or almost all of it, a reaction to what happened in June. There is going to be change, like we said before. Not sure what it's going to be as far as the developer impact. I don't know. Yeah. Clearly, I think one thing we're going to see, as I said before on the air, we're going to see the engineering reports. I believe on a periodic basis, there are going to be some reserve changes. Are they going to model after other states? It once upon a time, Florida, was the leader of the pack. Yeah. In terms of condominium law. We had one of the first enabling acts even allowing condominiums, way back when, 60 whatever. But now, all 50 states, have their own versions. There's the Uniform Condominium Act that some states have adopted. So I do think they're going to be looking, literally around the country and what other states are doing. And I realize Florida is unique in many ways because of our environment and things like that. But I do think, as I said before, it's going to be more restrictive. How restrictive? We'll see.
Yeah. All right. We got a couple calls here. Let's start with Edna. Go ahead, Edna.
I'm going to make a comment. When you were talking about DBPR interpreting things, I have not found them particularly helpful. They usually say contact your attorney. Okay, my question is, if
that's what they do.
What?
That's what they do.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
what they do.
Okay. All right. If reserves affect the home value of a condo, then what do short-term rentals do to the value of a condo?
I can
Well,
I
you'll
can
get
I can answer that.
Mark. Mark does a lot of rentals. So we'll talk.
Well, so here's the thing. Actually, in many cases, Edna, now if you're looking at it, it will increase the value of your unit. Now, that seems weird, but it's counter to what most associations want the answer to be, because what they want to do is say, well, you got short-term rentals that's going to affect it. It may affect your ability to borrow, to buy a house in there. So there's some offsetting issues. But I will tell you this: in the value of a unit, if it can be rented out, is going to be based on that rental income. And many times that rental income justifies a higher price. And so that's why you have buyers out there still in a market where people aren't buying homes for themselves. Like, we got a situation right now where there's a fair amount of buyers out there that are buying for investment because the rental market is crazy. And you've got, on a national level, you've got large companies that are buying large projects, large condominium projects and other things, and turning them back into turning them into rentals, turning them into apartments. We went through a period of time years and years ago where we had a big shift from apartments to condos. They called it condo conversions, and there was a whole aspect of the statute and how you did that. And now we've got associations kind of going the other way. But and now you asked me how it affects it. That's how it what I would say is it provides a floor. It doesn't necessarily get you all the time more money, but it keeps when it's based on income. And if they're short-term rentals, you probably got more of them. So you've got more VRBO type things and things like that, where that's going to generate a level of income that's going to provide you with a base value to your units. So even when units start falling in price, unless the rental market collapses at the same time, you're going to always have those investors out there who are looking to purchase units to support the values in your association. So now, having said all of that, that doesn't mean that you want short-term rentals. I mean, this is your home, and most people don't want a lot of people coming in and out of their homes. They don't want somebody new every week, or every other week. And so I understand that. And so from the standpoint of my home and a place to live, I really would rather restrict the number of short-term rentals, and I would rather restrict the number of rentals, period. I'd rather have people who own, because they generally, they have a financial investment in it, as opposed to the renter who's occupying it, doesn't have a financial investment in it. The investor does, of course, but not the unit owner. So I'm kind of in favor of a balance. I think that you should allow I think you should allow leases, but I certainly I wouldn't want my place, if I was living in an association, I wouldn't want my place turned into a hotel. I wouldn't want be able to lease every week or whatever. Now, as an investor working with clients, I'm currently looking at a building that allows you to lease every week, and that thing is worth a lot more than it should be, because you can generate about $50,000 worth of income on it a year, at least. So that would be my take on short-term rentals. I think that they can stabilize your community, because they can make the income value greater. But I don't know that I would necessarily want to live in a community that had a lot of that.
Yeah, that's my problem.
Yep, and that's most. And we go in this industry, we go through this thing where it kind of, we don't want any rentals, we don't want any investors, and we start, we kick everybody out, and then all of a sudden we go into a drop in the housing market, and people are, pulling out of their units, pulling out of their houses and walking away from their mortgages. And the association's now struggling to get dues, and they can't get units back on the market so that they can get, and they need that. And the only way they're going to do that is to get investors to come in and buy a lot of units and start paying assessments. And so then it all gets changed again, so I like, because of the fact that the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA, VA kind of limit, they don't want to lease in, or they don't want to loan into a community that has too many rentals, which I understand. They're concerned about that, but because they don't want to loan in, I do think you need some sort of restrictions. So even if you're going to allow short-term rentals, you shouldn't allow it to everybody. You see what I'm saying? And I think that, and I know you got to be real careful about being discriminatory, but I think you can do, I think, and Peter can jump in here, but I think you can have you can have a change in your bylaws or your documents to allow a certain percentage of the units can be rental, and that's it. And so once you reach that percentage, it's like, for example, in downtown Stewart, they have a liquor ordinance, and not every business downtown is allowed to go out and sell beer and wine and alcoholic beverages. They have designated, because they don't want downtown to become a bar. They don't want everything to turn into just a bar area. So they've got a provision that only a certain amount of square footage total downtown, 30% or something like that, can sell alcohol. And so they won't issue you a license or permit to sell alcohol downtown if there's no available space. Once the space becomes available, there's a lottery, and you take your chances at that point. So to me, that's more of a solution, I think, for associations, is to not necessarily limit or allow everything, but to kind of be more flexible on what you'll allow them to do, but less flexible on how many people can do it.
Well, I don't have any empirical data on, whether short-term rentals or a lot of rentals affects the value. I have a lot of anecdotal stories from clients who are unhappy when they have too many rentals or short-term rentals, where they anecdotally tell me that it's harming the community, hindering the values, devaluing, whatever. Generally these are negative, not positives.
Right.
As far as amending the documents, as we mentioned before, associations can literally prohibit renting. They can put a cap, as you mentioned, on the number of units that can be rented. Many impose a moratorium on the first year or two of ownership where you can't rent, as a way to discourage investor owners from acquiring units and then renting them because they can't rent for the first year or two, or even more. Now, as we've discussed, under the Condominium Act, and now it's in the HOA Act 207-20, when you amend your documents to prohibit or to limit the frequency or the duration of a rental, as far as term, or how frequently you can rent the unit or the home, there's a grandfathering where, the amendment only affects owners who vote in favor and owners who acquire their homes or units after the amendment has been recorded, after the effective date of it. So if you have a cap, whether it's a 15% cap, 20, 25%, whatever, those owners who don't vote in favor of it are grandfathered. They're not subject to it until they sell. So there's always that factor. And as in anything else, if you have a lot of owners who are renting, then as a practical matter, it's difficult to get them to vote to, put further restrictions upon rentals. So it's kind of a catch-22. But, do I have empirical data, again, on the impact on the value? No, I have not read any, again, scientific, if you want to call that, study on the actual impact.
Now, if you want to get rid of if you want to get rid of investors or in that kind of situation, there's two ways you can do it. One, you probably won't have many investors that'll buy in your association if you make people wait a year or more before they can lease their unit. No investor is going to buy. But the surefire way to get rid of investors, special assessments. As an investor, the last thing you want, because you're making your income off of rent that you're charging on a monthly basis. The last thing in the world you want is a special assessment. You might want it when you're buying because you're going to get the property for less, because the person that's bailing doesn't want to pay the special assessment. But I'm telling you, that's a surefire way to get investors out is you start having a lot of special assessments. But that's a surefire way to get a lot of owners unhappy too. But
Yes.
but that is, I mean, I will tell you, that's, the one thing that investors look at when they go to buy a unit is, do I have now, or am I going to have a special assessment? And frankly, it's an issue that should be and is somewhat being addressed on the ocean right now, because with all of the questions about spalling and all of the damage, if you've got a unit that either hasn't been recently repaired or is in the process of a repair for that type of thing, it's a crapshoot from an investor standpoint. You could be looking at a $20,000 or $30,000 special assessment. So, like I said, a lot of it in those situations, you run a much better chance that people buy it without considering that if they're buying it for their home. The value of a house on the upper end is always going to be the homeowner, because they will pay for stuff because it's so cute. but so oh, but that's so cute, I've got to have that. But and that's why I'm not saying that investment property necessarily pushes the value of your unit up. It doesn't all the time, but what it tends to do is stabilize. That's why commercial property tends to stabilize. The commercial condo market is typically more stable than the residential market in terms of resale and sales, because it's based on a third appraisal factor, which is income. And if you can't generate income off of the unit, you can't finance it. So anyway, it's kind of a interesting thing. But like I say, like Peter says, all of my data is empirical data, but then we have a radio show so we can make stuff up. So it's good for us.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Edna. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So we'll go. Peter, I'm glad Edna asked that question, because it kind of was what I was going to talk about a little bit. Is that whether associations should be proactive and begin to start looking at some of these things, that looking at their reserves, getting their reserve studies ordered. If you're going to have one, it's going to take forever if everybody has to have one. So I think now, if you need something like that, now's probably the time to jump in and get it done. At least during this next budget season, put it in the budget and get it done, because I think it's going to be something that's going to be, not, even if it's not required, it's going to be necessary, because I think unit owners are going to start asking, especially on these oceanfront condos, they're going to start asking the question, do you have engineering report?
I mean, they're already asking. I mean, I have clients where, owners and purchasers, for again, obvious reasons, are very interested in the maintenance history, engineering reports. If you want to say reserve study, same kind of thing. Again, interested in the condition of the property, how much are in reserves. The engineers are going to be incredibly pissy.
Yeah.
If they're not already. I mean, one thing I guess is, people can try to, I guess, jumpstart what they believe is coming, or what I believe is coming. Although until we actually see the new, assuming there is new legislation or rules, and see what exactly they say about the scope of these reports. I mean, what type of properties, what are they, what do they want these reports to cover? I mean, clearly, I think they're going to cover structural issues, but so in order to comply with whatever those laws are, we don't know what those laws are yet. So we can guess, try to guess.
Right.
But so that's another issue because again, it's still being thought about.
Yeah, and like I said, I think even if you get them on the table, and because they're not going to get to it tomorrow, probably.
Nope.
But even if the laws aren't firm by the time, which they probably wouldn't be, aren't firm by the time they actually get out here, at least you've got somebody who now considers you to be a customer of theirs.
Yeah. Well, look, I think any association, it behooves them,
right,
especially if they haven't done it for a while, to get a reserve/engineering study done. Okay, just to know what is the condition of the property. Period. I mean, this was always a good idea. We don't need Surfside to let us know that here in Florida, with our environment and our construction and the age of the buildings, I mean, it only makes sense to try to maintain the buildings the best that you can and to get experts in there to tell you things that you need to know. Again, we're just speaking, quite frankly, common sense for most of this. I understand there's the aspect of it costs a lot of money, and there's always that factor. But to me, it's always a good idea, period, to have a reserve study or an engineering study done every 5 to 7 years.
And one of the things that I've always been a big proponent of is that at least your first one should be done by an engineer. It should be there should be a structural engineer involved in it or an engineer involved in it who can sign off on engineering related issues. Yep. Because there's a lot of great reserve guys out there that do reserves, reports, but many of them, there's a large group of them that are not engineers, they're accountants. So they go out based on what they can see and what they know an association, has, and they've got a lot of experience, but they're not engineers. And so,
no, I agree. It should be an engineer's. Yeah, yes. I mean, they're trained to do that. That's what they do.
Right. So that's something. And then the other thing I would say is, and it happens all the time, but I wished it didn't, because it really ultimately doesn't help the industry. And that is that people buy houses and they buy condos and they buy things without doing their homework. And it is, they'll go ahead and purchase it without really, they don't get, I know I've asked for the stuff that's required, right? So you're supposed to get a financial statement. I've never gotten a financial statement. I never get reserve calculations. I get their documents. But I don't get all their documents because it doesn't include any of their financial information. So sometimes I'll get a budget. Most of the time, maybe not. It's amazing what that people give me, because realtors don't know what to look for. They really don't. Many of them maybe have some training, but a lot of them don't know what documents, what to look at, where to look at it, and what to find out. And frankly, your job is to sell the unit. If your buyer's saying, I don't care, I don't need to see that stuff, and you're trying to tell them, well, you should, well, I love this place, look at the view. So, I understand. Nobody's ever asking about it, even though it adds 3 days to the right of rescission and all that kind of stuff. People aren't asking for that stuff. They're signing off when they're not getting 100% of what they're supposed to get. And what they don't get in most cases is the financial information, because nobody can read it. They don't understand it, so they can't read it. So they don't want to see it. They might read the documents, but nobody's looking for footnotes and financial statements to see what the reserve schedule is and what the lives are and whether they're fully funding and partially funding. Now, they should be, but people from out of state don't know that. And so they don't ask those questions and they don't get into it. So, some of them maybe that have, been in condos up north now. And, like you said, Peter, Florida's kind of been the one that sets the standard. There's now more states that have some of the same laws that we have, so it helps a little bit. But anyway,
I mean,
go ahead.
There are many states where you cannot waive reserves. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying we're going to go that way. Don't know, but that's not like a national standard. Being able to waive reserves or have less reserves than needed.
Well, the other thing that's in a lot of states that I wished we would go with is in a lot of states, there's no prohibition against overfunding your reserve. In other words, having a contingency portion or a interest portion or inflation portion or anything like that. A lot of states allow that. A lot of states allow a base. They allow you to have a base reserve of, let's say, 200,000, and then the actual reserve goes above that, so that you've got this $200,000 cushion or this $100,000 cushion. And to me, I could never understand why any state would discourage that. Why you would discourage an association from over providing reserves, I have no idea. But we will. The state of Florida does, and they will enforce it. If you try to put that kind of a cushion in your reserve, they will tell you your reserve calculation is incorrect, and you have to redo it. So it's kind of funny, but I think there will be some of those. Hopefully, there will be some of those changes. As it relates to developers, I hope that that right now the as it relates to reserves, if I'm a developer, there is no way I'm going to declare and institute reserves if I have a choice, because it's going to come up down the road to bite me, because they can take and use that against me to fund millions of dollars worth of repairs later. So as a developer, I'd be forced to stay away from that, even though as a developer, I wouldn't mind providing something. If we're making money, if we're making a little bit of money or breaking even, or I'm doing my developer guarantee, I wouldn't mind being able to, I don't want to necessarily fully fund because I just gave them brand new stuff, but I would like to be able to start putting some money aside just in case, so that the unit owners, when they buy in, would start saying, hey, maybe I should do that. Most of these developers are not, there's some that are really kind of shaky, but most of these developers are really just trying to build a project, get it sold, and get out. And they want people to be happy when they're done, because they make a lot of money off of referrals. The next project, they don't want to just sell 100 homes and then never be able to sell another home, because the word is they build a house that falls down. So it's kind of an interesting thing out there. So, but a lot of these regulations, because of the way they're written, they're supposedly designed to protect someone, but in reality, what they do is they really force the opposite situation. Like I said, a lot of developers don't mind putting up some money. They don't want to fully fund reserves. They don't mind putting a little bit of money away as a contingency while it's under their control to cover some of that stuff. But they're not going to do that if it's going to mean that they're responsible to fully fund every single item that's in the association. So it's kind of so it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out and what happens. But the other thing I was going to ask you about, Peter, is I guess the insurance market is going crazy. I think I know I'm hearing a lot of issues. And you mentioned the other day, I think last week or the week before, talking about, you think that that just in general, that you've heard that the liability policies and things are going to go up as a result of the Surfside disaster. Is that, you still hearing that?
Unknown, unsure.
Yeah.
Or quite frankly. They were going up before Surfside because of all the subrogation claims.
Yeah.
that some insurance companies do against associations. Um, I think Surfside likely will cause that sort of ripple effect,
Mhm.
but we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Like I said, I was at a CIRA meeting and they said that. So maybe it was, um, maybe that was where I heard all of the information. But yeah, they told me a number of the guys that are there, particularly the ones that have property management companies, primarily CPAs that have property management companies. They were talking about the insurance going up pretty heavily on some of their stuff, and particularly
well, that would fit the pattern. The
right.
pattern is, there's always a reaction, whether it's hurricane or whatever, and typically, the insurance will reflect a disaster of one nature or the other. So like I said, we'll see. I mean, I would not be surprised.
Yeah, I heard that on the Champlain thing that that the insurance company they I guess they did not have a really high policy. I think their max was like $30 million or something, and so the insurance company just paid out the limit. So they didn't worry about whether they owed it or not. They just knew that they would owe at least 30 million, so they just paid it out. Um, so it'll be be kind of interesting to see what happens. I guess now they're trying to. I think a developer's come in and is trying to buy that property for a fairly hefty amount of money. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. The other thing that's going to and like I said, I've got a couple associations now that I'm got a little bigger base. I got a couple associations that are selling. The association was looking at fairly significant construction issues, spalling things, new balconies, the whole bit, reconstruction of the building. And so they're just bailing. They're going to sell the whole thing.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I had one client do that several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, predates all this stuff. It was a small association. I think it was 30 units, and on the ocean, they didn't want to. They didn't want to go through the concrete of, I think it was X million per unit, and they terminated and sold.
Yeah, and I think that I think we're going to see that. I mentioned it because I think we're going to see that coming up. If you force, that's what I was talking about a little bit on the regulation. Is it good to have? Is it good to have at least a some required reserve study done every so many years? Yes, absolutely. At least so that exactly what's out there that's going to have to be fixed. But uh, but at the same time, mandatory funding of that, you're going to force some associations to have to sell because too many people aren't going to be able to finance that. They're not going to be able to afford it, and on some of those things when all this work has to be done. And I think we're going to see a lot more. I think we're going to see a lot more of that issue uh, on the ocean and on the Gulf over there. You take some of those places uh, in Tampa and St. Pete that are on the water over there, and of course all the stuff here on the southeast coast. Uh, the thing is, some of these buildings down in like Dade and Broward County, they were built by big companies, and many of them were built pretty solid. They were big buildings, so structurally you're reinforcing them to be a 20 or 30-story building. You start getting up further north on the coast, up into Martin County, but especially up in you get up into Brevard or Daytona, they have a lot of condos and stuff in those areas, and many of them are high rise, and I think they were probably built on the cheap. Sometimes not always knowing what they were doing, and I think that's going to be a problem. I think there's going to be I think there's going to be some issues, and I think people are going to be selling associations. They're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to afford to live on the ocean. In some cases, these units are going to just, as a commonplace, become $1 million. I think, but we'll see. It'll see what happens. It's just, how much you're paying in assessments, affects the value of that unit, as far as what your costs are. So anyway, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there, and what happens going forward. Do you for our show going forward, Peter? Not today, but you want to give some thought to, maybe if there is anything out there that you want to talk to us about, legislatively, or things that are happening, or whatever, or have happened previously. If there's anything out there that you think is significant, maybe we can get, we can discuss that a little bit too going forward. I know we had some changes this last time, so
Yep.
we can cover some of that as we're going forward here too. And then the last thing I would say is, we're in the height of the hurricane season coming up here in the next 2 weeks. So, just keep your eyes open. It's real easy with all the things going on with COVID and everything else to lose track of what's happening. Lose track of what's happening out there in a lot of these areas. So, keep your eyes on the tropics, keep your eyes on the weather, know what's out there, and what the potential impact is, because it's going to be, it does start getting active this time of year. Hopefully we'll be spared another season, but at least keep an eye on it so that you're not caught by surprise. Again, if we've got people that are staying at home and all that kind of stuff, supplies are going to be hard to get. Toilet paper is going to be hard to get. All those things are going to be hard to get again. And it makes it even worse if we've got a hurricane. So keep an eye on things. You do some stocking up. Make sure you're ready. If you haven't put stuff aside, go out and get some things to keep aside so that you can have them if you need to be indoors. Just pretend like you're quarantined and have whatever